Hey, hello and welcome to today's webinar, Risk Management for Medical Devices, a data-driven approach to comply with ISO 14971. Thanks for joining in. Let's take 1 or 2 more minutes to wait for the latecomers, let's put it this way. And the webinar will then start soon. All right, I think let's start. Again, hello and welcome to today's webinar, Risk Management for Medical Devices. My name is Klaus Merz. I'm the client exec in the life science industry here for Central Europe, and I'm your host today. By the way, thank you very much. We are 4 people that organized this webinar. Mirella Recallo from the marketing side, and my 2 subject matter experts and colleagues, Claudia Greffrath and Morten Huber, that will demonstrate and explain how Dassault Systems addresses the challenges of the ISO 14971. Okay, what is it all about? I mean, integrating risk management into the development process, not as an afterthought, but as a continuous companion for initial concept through post-market surveillance, for example. Automating repetitive tasks from FMEA update to kappa linkages to trend analysis, and of course, creating a single source of truth where all the risk-related and risk-relevant information is available in real time and audit-ready. Sorry. I'd like to encourage you to make use of the F&A button down there, what you can see, and ask questions if you have. We would be happy to answer this at the end of the webinar. And now, without further ado, I hand over to Claudia Greffrath. The floor is yours, Claudia. Please take over.
Yeah, thank you. I hope you can see my screen. Let's start. So maybe start with the risk management for medical devices. So some key values. So the overarching goal is really to ensure patient safety by embedding risk management in medical device development. And here's, let's say, some of the key values by reducing device recalls, by improving device safety. Of course, harmonize risk management across products and teams by embracing a model-based approach. And as my colleague Klaus mentioned, easily, of course, comply with ISO 14971 by embracing regulation as an asset. So this is what we will focus on to bring you the value from our 3D experience platform. And we prepared agenda for this one webinar hour. So first of all, just to introduce you who we are as the Dassault Systems company, and then some challenges in medical device we want also to cover. And of course, introducing to the 3D experience platform. It is much more that we, of course, highlight today in the webinar, the risk management, but we have much more products in the platform that we can cover. And then we switch and hand over to Morten, my colleague Morten Huber, and he will directly showcase everything in a live demonstration. After that, a short conclusion and a recap what we covered, and a QA session. So first, our legacy and evolution, where we come from. So the transformation journey of Dassault Systems is over, let's say, the past 4 decades. and more importantly, where we are headed. So 1981, we began with a very clear mission to bring 3D design to engineering. And the goal was straightforward: help companies, of course, create better products by moving from physical drawing to a digital 3D environment. In 1989, we introduced the concept of a 3D digital mockup. So it reduced costs and accelerated innovation across industries like aerospace and automotive. And the next major step came in 1999 with 3D PLM, so the product lifecycle management. And we expanded from supporting design to supporting the entire life cycle of a product. So from concept to engineering to manufacturing and into service. And this connected people, data, and processes end to end. The next decade, in year 2012, we launched the 3D Experience platform. So this was a significant mindset shift. So instead of focusing only on the product itself, we started focusing on the entire experience. So around it, how it's used, maintained, improved, and how it impacts society. So we moved from delivering software tools to delivering a business experience platform. Looking at 2020, we extended the idea of a virtual twin, so beyond products to humans. And this enabled new breakthroughs in healthcare, bioscience, and patient-specific experiences. So we can simulate the human heart, for example, to improve treatments and outcomes without invasive procedures. And looking ahead toward 2040, our ambition is clear: virtual twin experiences for a sustainable world. That means we continue evolving, from focusing on industry to improving life, from designing products to designing experiences, and from enabling efficiency to enabling human-centric innovation. So this timeline is not just a history of software milestones, it's really a journey of expanding impact, moving from 3D design to shaping a more sustainable future for our planet and society. Who we serve. So in today's webinar, our primary focus is on the medical device or medical sector, medtech. However, we will also be covering other relevant industries. So a topic I will elaborate on later in the session. But here we can see we are supporting the biopharma for molecular therapies and digital therapies, the medtech with medical devices and diagnostics, and in the healthcare services. And of course, we have some references here. So companies there already are dealing with the 3D experience platform, so our solution for the different sectors. Looking at our footprint, unique cross-domain. So I do not want to mention everything here, but maybe to highlight that we have more than 10,000 active customers who are working with our solution. More than 50% of drugs and medical devices designed with our solutions, and about 40% for new clinical trials supported by our solutions. So this is just some highlights here to bring. So let's have a look to the challenges in medical device. So the risk management complexity. So the process of conducting effective risk management is becoming increasingly difficult. So looking at the regulatory technology balance, medical device companies face the challenge of reconciling ongoing technological innovation with an ever-changing regulatory landscape. So, and impact of EU and MDR. So these regulations necessitate that companies rethink their development processes and implement future-proof systems to maintain competitiveness. So looking at product safety and complexity, so ensuring really the safety is harder to implement as medical devices become more complex, integrating mechanical, electrical, electronic, and software components. And this requires companies to adopt processes that facilitate collaboration among multidisciplinary teams. The outdated documentation methods, so many companies are struggling to keep up with the regulatory changes because they rely on outdated document-based solutions. And by utilizing the 3D Experience platform, you can centralize all related data and processes, leveraging it as your single source of truth. The cost of innovation in medtech is increasing. For instance, about 15,000 patent applications were filed at the European Patent Office by medtech companies in 2021, and significantly more than by pharmaceutical or biotech companies. So, but R&D spending and patents alone don't guarantee proportional value creation. And an analysis from McKinsey of the 70 largest global medtech companies reveals that average R&D spending in the previous 3 years accounted for only about 1.6% of the variations in companies. So, in fact, the average number of US, so Food and Drug Administration, FDA, approvals per $1 billion and spent has declined by an average of 9% per year since 2011. So in total, the cost of innovation has increased. Just highlight the direct costs here. So looking at the direct costs, of a poor quality, we are about 4.8 until 6.9%. And if we are looking of a direct cost of ensuring good quality, this is a smaller, so we are by a number of 2% until 2.5%. Then let's have a look to the 3D Experience platform. So by looking at our brand applications and industries. So the model-based approach goes beyond connecting 3D models to the relevant other data sets. So in case of MBSE, functional and logical models are also connected to the relevant data sets. And a user does not need to switch from one system to another system. The apps used by the user provide them a filtered view and dedicated capabilities. And this is what I mentioned before. Of course, we are covering other industries. We highlight and focus today in the webinar for life science healthcare, but of course we have experiences and cover each, let's say, business process for home lifestyle or aerospace defense. So a platform connecting people, data, and processes. So what enables our apps to work together is a unified data model. So the target is to have all information stored as connected data sets instead of a document-driven approach. So advantage of such an approach in other domains like Amazon, Uber, R&B have shown that a platform connecting all stakeholders reduces dramatically communication and response times. So meanwhile, improving quality and user satisfaction by real-time visibility. So however we want to operate or maintain or engineer, so everything is, let's say in a circle and connected in the 3D experience platform as a single source of truth. The virtual twin experiences. So, and let's say to connect domains together, something truly special about 3DS is that we built the virtual twin experience of the patient, the product, the process, and the plant. So we are looking at the four different sectors here. So we have the patient virtual twin for clinical trial, cohort, organ, and tissue. Oops, sorry. And for the product virtual twin, device system architecture, molecule and formulation. For the process virtual twin, recipe, method, operations, assembly and controls. And bringing all this information together, we of course cover the plant virtual twin, so for building, environment, equipment, and resources. This slide illustrates how the 3D Experience platform supports the entire medical device design and engineering life cycle, so enabling a strategy of compliance by design. So the key message is that modeling the device and adopting a data-driven approach transforms how regulatory compliance is achieved. So the platform connects three critical elements. First is the 3D experience data model. So includes requirements, functional reference, logical reference, physical product, and of course much more, so risk hazards, test cases, results, and effects. The design control ontology, so this represents the formal, so regulated steps of the design process, which are managed and tracked within the platform. And the platform's application ensure the execution and traceability of key design control activities as design input, design validation, and, for example, design output. The third column is regulatory authorities. So the integrated data model and compliant design control processes facilitate a seamless interaction and audit readiness for global regulatory bodies, including, of course, EU MDR, so, and the European Medicine Agency, FDA, and all the others. So in summary, the 3D Experience platform digitalizes the entire design process, linking all technical data to regulatory steps, and which ensures compliance is built in rather than bolt on. We have a rich portfolio of solution experiences. We will not go through our solution experiences today. but we will go in depth later through various demonstrations. So for today, you see we have on the left side different domains or departments. So for R&D, for clinical quality and safety, and also for the different phases, starting from concept until end of life of the product. So that means supporting all these different steps and domains, we have the solution experiences that we can offer. Today, we will focus, sorry. So today we will focus on the unified risk management, but really we focus for quality and safety domain and regulatory affairs, and it includes the risk management plan, assessment, control measure, management review, and of course, at the end of the day, a report. Yeah, so risk management report. But this will be shown by my colleague Morten in a few minutes. And you can also see that everything is connected. So from top down to bottom down, yeah. So medical device companies must implement a risk management procedure compliant with ISO 14971. And this standard outlines best practices for manufacturers or medical devices to identify the hazards associated with the medical device, to estimate and evaluate the associated risks, to control this risk, and to monitor the effectiveness of the controls. And the process described in this document applies to risks associated with a medical device, such as risk related to biocompatibility data and systems. So let's say security, electricity, moving parts, radiation, and usability. So that is the presentation of my part. And now I want to hand over to my colleague Morten, and we will showcase you in a live demonstration our solution.
All right. Yeah, thanks for the introduction, Claudia. So I will just take the screen right now and just give me an okay if you can see my screen now.
Yes, we can.
Perfect. All right, then I can start. So basically, I will show you probably during the next 30 minutes of how this actually looks live in our system. So what you see right now is I'm in my browser. That is where we operate primarily our 3D experience platform. I will just go to the full screen mode now. But before I jump actually into the content, I want to spend a few moments to tell you what you are about to see and what I want you to remember from what I'm going to tell you in the next 30 minutes. So as it was already mentioned, especially in the medtech domain, a lot of the processes also when it comes to risk management are mostly document-driven, also due to the fact that in the end, for the audits, the documents that needed to be handed in are, of course, the documents itself. And I want to show you that working in a collaboration platform that provides a unified data model, you can achieve in your system that all the objects, all the processes that you have in the system are somewhat connected to each other. So we are talking about the traceability. You already heard the word before. And I also want to show you how in these typical design processes that you have in the context of the V model, especially the system design on the left-hand side, how risk management can also or should also play a crucial part in these activities and should be tightly connected also in the semantics of such a environment as, for example, the 3D experience platform. This is one thing I especially want to demonstrate to you today. The other thing, as I was already mentioning, it should also be possible to take the latest status, the most recent data from the system, and print it into a format that is actually accepted by informed or notified body when it comes to an audit. So for example, taking all the data of, for example, in failure modes and effects analysis, or in ISO 14971 compliant analysis and printing it, for example, into PDF or similar formats. So take these two things, keep them in mind, and listen carefully of what I'm going to tell you in a few moments. And in the end, we will wrap up once again to see if I actually have achieved that goal. But before I start, I want to explain quickly what the main concepts around the 3D experience platform are. So I will just jump to the new tab that I created, and you will see it's not an arrow, there is a completely empty tab here. And what the 3D dashboard is usually all about is very similar to what you see on web pages in a browser like Firefox or Google Chrome. So when you open new tabs, you have the capabilities to search for sites or anything. And something very similar is what we are doing in the means of the 3D experience platform. So we have at the center of all of operations our compass. And in this compass, as you can see here on the top left screen, there are roles, apps, and our whole solutions that we provide as Dassault Systèmes. So when I click on this compass, I actually see as a user myself all the roles I have access to. For example, starting very early in the product development processes, I could go, for example, with a role that is called requirements engineer. And I can see within this role, I have access to certain so-called widgets. And now I can actually use these widgets to populate my tabs. So for example, if I take the requirements and drag and drop them into this widget, I now have access to the requirements that are part of the 3D experience platform and that I can use and retrieve data from and read them out. So generally speaking, you can imagine yourself the 3D experience platform in a way that we store all of your engineering data, and with specific widgets, you get access to a certain amount of the data to not be completely overwhelmed of all the data there is. So for example, with the requirements app, you only have access to requirements objects that are part of the 3D experience platform. You will see throughout the story that I will go through multiple widgets that are used for certain discipline-specific toolings, but this just as a very, very general introduction of the basic capabilities of a so-called 3D dashboard. All right, moving on actually to the subject that I want to speak about today. So the story that I will show you with regards to the risk management is about a device that is not actually being manufactured. It's a virtual twin that was developed by Dassault Systèmes. And it's a device that is used in the field of oncology, especially in the treatment of brain cancer. So you can imagine there is a device that can be attached to a patch that is put onto the arm of a patient, and the patient himself or herself can attach this device to this patch. And there are some molecules or chemicals inserted into the catheter that is already connected to the patient. And this is targeting special receptors that are a marker for typical brain cancer cells in order to bring this molecule that is used for the treatment of the same cancer into the brain blood cells. This is the basic theory behind what we are doing here. There's also a short video that is quickly demonstrating a bit on how this actually looks like. So there's once again the example here. Yeah, the video is not completely playing through right now, but basically here there is also the 3D model that we can investigate at that point. And without further ado, I would like to now jump into the first domain that we are having a look at, and these are the requirements. Before I do that, just a quick wrap up how this device is supposed to be used, because we will see also this being reflected, of course, then in the requirements specification. All right, so here you see the typical process of this device being put into use. So how I already mentioned it in the beginning, there's a patch that is within the hospital when the patient is in cancer treatment or starts the cancer treatment, being put onto the arm of the patient. And then the patient himself or herself is released actually out of the hospital to administer the doses of the chemicals or the molecules that are being inserted into the body, him or herself later on. So he's provided with these IASO devices that can later be used to just attach to this patch onto the arm. And the whole device is controlled via a mobile phone app. And then later on, there, of course, are maintenance conducted in the hospital. There are new doctor's appointment that the patient has to do, and so on. And the process can repeat depending on the amount of treatments needed in this context. All right. Moving on to the requirements. So you see very similar to us what you would do in a browser. I just switched the tabs and now I'm here in the requirements application once again. And I have already opened 2 requirement specifications that I want to further speak about in the next moments. First of all, we have a requirement specification. And as I mentioned in the beginning, my goal is to show you that all of these are actual objects in the system. And as we are talking about a PLM system, so a product lifecycle management system, we see that all of these objects have a lifecycle themselves. And this applies to probably 80 to 90% of the objects I'm going to talk about in the few moments that will come. So this is just a very high-level requirement specification that is once again explaining a bit the main concepts, I would say, of the ISO 14971 regulation that you are probably all very familiar with. So starting with risk management plan, doing risk analysis, later on talking about risk control, and in the end, producing a risk management file to summarize everything that was conducted in the context of risk management processes. And I also have my IASO, so the device I was just introducing to you, system requirements that also once again specify a bit what this device is all about. So I have a general item description. I have an indication of use that is also sometimes very relevant in the context of risk management to really focus on the main processes, the main activities that the device is actually doing. But we also see here early risk control measures being implemented. I will talk about them later briefly when we talk actually about the context of risk management being conducted. Also some other things, as we are working object-based, it is possible to connect, of course, these objects. So I can see, for example, that within the requirement of the risk management plan, that there is already a refinement into other requirements that are covering this requirement. I see that I have here connected the item description from the requirement specification below to the requirement that I see here on top. So there's interconnectivity between these devices possible, and not just between requirements, but also to all the other objects that are also being used in the platform. Talking about a discipline and other objects that are closely related to requirements are test cases. So here's another widget, which is called VNV Strategy, that gives me access to all the test objects that I have available in the platform. So here I see multiple test cases that were performed, and I can see also the test executions is what the object in the platform is called that have been done. And I can also check the description of those. I see which items were actually tested. I see who was the assignee and the conclusion, if there is any conclusion available for this test. And also, as I was mentioning it before, it's very, very crucial to actually map the requirements to these test cases. Also in the context later on for the risk management, because according to the ISO 14971, every manufacturer is obliged to show not just implementation of risk control, but also the effectiveness of risk control. And that can usually only be done by actual physical testing, simulation purposes, and so on. So this is a very, very complex and very important connection between the requirements and the testing that is conducted when it comes to actual risk management. Now moving on, because I was mentioning briefly in the beginning, the product development processes. And also when it comes to functional evaluation of risk, it's quite important to connect also with other disciplines, for example, systems engineering, when there are more complex devices. And with complex devices, I mean devices that also include software code combined with hardware architecture. very complex functionality that is cross-disciplinary, then it really makes sense to speak about systems engineering. But I will not speak too much about systems engineering here. Just what I wanted to show you, that within the architecture, there are explanations of our operation context or operational context of our device. So we can see that our ISO device is in context of a patient, of a physician, of a clinician, of a display unit, and so on. But more importantly, besides also a logical architecture that is basically showing the decomposition of our system, are the functions. So this is a very high-level breakdown of the functions and how they are connected within this device. And more importantly, very high-level function for us is provide information to the patient, because previously I already mentioned that we should be able to control the device with a mobile phone app, but also the ordering of an injection. This is something also on the left-hand side on the V model that we should take into account. And these are functions that we later on also use in the context of failure modes and effects analysis. Then briefly speaking about the physical model. So there's another widget called Product Structure Explorer that is giving us the access to the physical structure. So once again, I'm only showing you with these widgets small excerpts of the system to not make it overwhelming in just one screen. So this is an app usually designers would use to check actually the 3D geometry of the model. You can also see that when I click on different nodes in this product structure, different parts of the device are highlighted. And once again, as it was already shown before, we are talking about objects here. So these are all objects that were created with the CATIA 3D experience. And you can see always the owner, the type, the revision, the life cycle, and so on. But this is on the left-hand side of the V model. I will not go into details here, but this is the basic design development, product development processes. And I was already showing in the beginning that at this stage, it's quite important to understand how these objects are actually interconnected. So I want to take maybe 1 or 2 moments to quickly speak about that. Because I was mentioning already the traceability in the beginning of the webinar. And what this is basically showing to me, I will zoom in a little bit more, is a coverage of those elements between each other. So for example, here we see that our logical architecture is covered by 40% by our 3D model that we have later on. And with this assessment, we can check very early in the processes if there are requirements that we have not yet looked at all, because they are not connected to other artifacts that are created more downstream in the process. Could be functions of the device being identified, could be systems of the device being identified, or even 3D geometries, 3D models. So for example, zooming into this coverage here, I can show you a little bit of an excerpt how this looks like. For example, if I am here on the battery system, which is identified by systems engineer, and I want to assess the impact, I can see that this is actually being connected to the battery in the 3D, of course. I can also see that it's connected to functions and also to system requirements, and later on also potentially to regulations and norms. So this is very, very crucial aspects also in the context of the ISO 14971, but also in the more wider context of the medical devices regulation, because traceability in the end is a super important thing. And you don't want to be the one searching for this kind of assessment in thousands of documents that have been created well over time for a long time. All right, now talking enough about the systems engineering and product development. I really like to talk about this topic more because I'm actually a systems engineer, but now I'm actually moving to the topic more or less of the webinar. So now, as I mentioned in the beginning, to quickly recap, I want to connect the risk management processes to what we have just seen, because it's very, very important that the risk management is integrated into product development processes. Starting with that, usually when we start with the risk management, the first thing that actually needs to be done is to have a look at the identification of hazards that can occur in the context of my product. And once again, here you see that there are some texts where there's an icon before the text, which usually indicates in our system that we are talking about objects. And once again, with objects, I mean that they have a unique identifier in our system, that they have a life cycle, they have a history of change, and things I can actually check in this context. This is a table view that is now being used to summarize our main hazards that we have identified. Then also, as it is also written in the standard, an identification of a foreseeable sequence of events to this related hazard. So you see here in this context, it's actually free text that I can enter. Additionally, a hazardous situation that might occur, and in the end, the harm with the related severity. So this is a drop-down field. You will later on see that we can use it more and more in the context of the actual risk analysis. So this will be the next step. And this is a table. The table itself also has a life cycle, as this is also once again an object. And this is something we can further utilize in this context as well. So we can put it to a frozen state, meaning that nobody is now allowed to edit it anymore. This is a table that was already released, meaning it can be used for further usage, for example, in the context of such ISO 14971 analysis at this stage. All right, talking of which, jumping to my next step of the ISO 14971 analysis. So what you see here is actually the product structure that I was just showing to you. And I mentioned it's very, very important to integrate the risk management processes to the actual design development. And you see that the tables that we are looking at right now, so this is an ISO 14971 risk analysis, how it is described in the ISO standard. I will also talk about the columns in a moment, is directly attached to our structures. And this is a very important thing later on to make sure if when there are structures are being reused, that you also reuse the risk analysis that is already part of this structure. So you deliver all the engineering assets that you have in the context of the risk with your structure to other teams to collaborate on that. And once again, same procedure. When there is an icon below the text, meaning we are talking about an actual object in our database. And you can see here that I not just referenced this structure with our risk analysis, but I also referenced this hazard catalog that I was just showing to you that has the comprehensive view on all the hazards identified with the related foreseeable sequence of events, hazardous situations, harm, and their severity. Also in this context to make sure I'm actually using the correct information that was identified by clinical staff or whomever is in charge of such hazard catalog in that context. All right, starting with the first row. So this is a hazard that was actually taken from the hazard catalog and the related harm. And the severity is already being read out from this harm accordingly to what we have seen in the hazard catalog. For the causes, there's quite an interesting thing, at least for me, it's quite interesting because we can see that there is on the one hand side, the listing of another structure. We see a function there indicated with the small f here, and we see a failure. And this is not some text that I was creative enough to write. It is actually information from our system. So if I navigate in our structure tree on the left-hand side here, I can see below the communication assembly, I have this function, provide information to patient, and I can see below this function, what are the typical failures of this function. And this is something I'm directly reusing for filling out the table. And this is really, really crucial. Once again, I can only emphasize this once again. It is not free text, it is information that takes into account what is already in the system, and in this case, what is already in the same structure of our ISO device. Then moving on, I have some causes categorization according to IMDRF. Those are certain codes that are explaining the origin of causes. And this is a drop-down list. I have not included those hundreds items that are actually specified in the IMDRF, but those are lists that are completely modifiable. And this is a template I just built myself. Then, as we have seen, we're talking about risk, but I have not yet evaluated any risk. So far, we have only seen the severity that is actually attached to this harm. But now you can actually change here the probability of the occurrence of that harm. And you will see that the risk, which is currently highlighted in green because it's computed to a value of risk 2, which is still an acceptable risk. And if I increase the probability here, you will see that at a certain value, it increases already to 3. But if I put it to 5, meaning a very high probability of the harm actually occurring, this becomes red. So there's actually means to put formulas behind the tables that automatically computes the risk for you, that you don't have to do this manually, because this is a process. I mean, I know it from myself, which is quite error prone if you are just entering manually the risk, where there is always a formula behind that is usually explained in a risk management plan. But in some cases, I have seen examples where this is done manually. Once again, emphasizing the reuse capabilities. So here you see there is text in the current risk control measures, and you see that this is a text that has an icon before it that actually is very similar to a requirement. This is due to the fact that it is an actual requirement in our system. So now I have selected this one object, and I can see I'm actually being directed to this requirement. Similarly, I can also add new requirements to that. So I will just go to the system and type in the query for searching requirements. I get 823 results, and I can just drag and drop this requirement, put it into the list, and now this requirement is part of my current risk control measures. Similarly, I can remove it again. But this is basically the way of filling out these tables. So it's not all about entering a lot of free text, especially when you want to standardize your processes. Reusing objects that already have standardized and normalized text really brings you a big benefit, because you have a lot of freedom if you're doing that in documents. And this is somewhat regulated a bit within the process of just using objects and dragging and dropping these objects into the table. Then you also might ask yourself, okay, this looks very cool, but I also want to collaborate with others, because risk management processes usually are done throughout moderation, where there are multiple people as part of the process. So you also need to make sure that for the risk minimization or risk mitigation processes, you also invite other people to contribute to the process. And the 3D Experience platform as a collaboration platform also provides the mean to raise so-called issues to address a problem that was identified in these processes. For example, here, I'm just opening this issue and I see that there is a description of what should be done in this context, because there should be a completion detection system, because it was one of our errors that our display system was not capable of displaying the right information. So this is basically a task where you can address the information. I can also name other members to contribute to that. This is now a very boring example of myself, because it's only something I did myself. But theoretically speaking, I could also add informed users, so other users having access to the system, coordinators, assignees, and so on. Now moving on to the actual implemented risk control measures, so additional risk control measures. As I was mentioning in the beginning, you are obliged to show that you not have just implemented additional risk control measures, which you could, for example, do by introducing new requirements to your system, but you're also obliged to share that these are actually effective. And this is something where we are talking about these test objects that I was showing in the beginning. And here's an example of exactly such a test object being used for this exact purpose. So I just selected once again this object. I see it's so-called test execution. It actually gives more information what was done. Last but not least, of course, we have to evaluate the residual probability here. So once again, this is a value that is automatically connected. So I can see when I change this value, the residual risk is also changed accordingly. And I have a rationale that I can provide in the end. As I was already mentioning, this is something where the risk analysis is actually being done. Once this is done and maybe put to a state where it could be handed in for audit or something similar, it might make sense to go one more round of moderation. And for that, there are actually review purposes available as well. So here I have just loaded the same table in this review app, and you can see I did add a lot of comments here of fields that could be edited in the future. So let me just pin this to the right, and I can go through the comments and I see in the tables that actually the right parts are being highlighted to me. And most of these risk analysis, they have actually a lot of rows. So I've seen rows of way over 1,000 rows in these risk analysis tables, and it takes a lot of time to scroll through that in order to find the right entry that you are actually looking at. So this is also a thing that, of course, this collaboration platform can provide to you and can be of great help, except or compared to searching in an Excel file with Control F for the right entries that you actually want to review. Also, an additional help that the system can provide to you is basically the creation of these analysis dashboards. So I'm just showing a video here right now, moving shortly away from the light system. And this is basically showing us the list of all the hazards that are available, the harms, the hazard situation. And it's interactive. So when I select one hazard, I can actually see all the harms that are related to that and all the hazard situations related to that. So it's also something to have in mind while doing that. Then I just move on a little bit, talking about the DFMEA. So the ISO 14971 analysis that we have seen before is in the first context used to evaluate the risk that is immediate to the patient. But of course, on the lower levels, it's also important to evaluate the functions that we have identified in the beginning. So this is typically done with the so-called design FMEA. Also, when we are talking about processes, it could be a process FMEA or other types of FMEA. And you see here in the context, there's this provide information to patient that we have seen in the beginning. And the procedure is completely the same. So I will not go through all the columns here because the procedure is very, very similar to what we have seen in the ISO 14971 analysis. But before ending that, I actually want to show you the very last step, because we have now seen that in the system, we can bring all of this data together. But it is, of course, also important to bring this later on to a format that can be retrieved by an audit. And by bringing this data together, let me just show you this quickly. I actually have connected it, right? Because we have seen that on our main structure, there was this risk analysis. And you can see that there are some objects that are being used in the risk analysis, but they come actually from the hazard catalog. So this is what I see here. So this loss of function is an object that is being used in multiple of these tables. And that is a very, very crucial point. And it is also once again connected to the functions, as we have seen in the DFMEA, that are coming from the design processes. And after I have finalized all of these processes, I have released all the tables, I can just very handily download the report from my system. And let me just open that file to show you how this actually looks like. So you see it here. This is an excerpt from the system. Yeah, shame on myself. I did it yesterday at very late time. This is the ISO 14971 analysis that we have seen in the system, and it's taking the live data and reporting all of that into a format, into a PDF format that can actually be used for further submission processes. So we see all the hazards, all the foreseeable sequence identified in this hazard catalog, and we see the complete analysis with the dedicated highlighting of the cells and also the highlighting if there are unacceptable risks. We see a risk matrix before and after the introduction of additional risk control measures, because these are the fields we usually want to get rid of because they are not acceptable risks. And we also see a summary of the risk analysis where there could be some statements about the benefit risk analysis, which is also, of course, part of the ISO and so on. And this is a process that can be customized according to your own needs and later on being printed out. So once again, very quick summarization of what I have showed to you. Coming back to the slides that I showed in the beginning, what I wanted to show you is that we do have the means here to do all the design processes, that we have all of the objects being connected to each other, that we can assess very quickly what change has as an impact on all the other objects that we are using, and also the capability to reuse data so that we can connect requirements, risk management, and pest management, as you have seen it in the ISO 14971 analysis. And that's basically what I wanted to show you in this live demo. And I hope you understood this value that the system brings in the context of risk management to really unify the processes, align the processes, and standardize the processes to bring the people together to work in the same system cross-disciplinary. And with that being said, I want to give over once again to Claudia to wrap up.
Yes. Let me share my screen. So hopefully you can see my screen. So looking at the time, and Morten, you already make the conclusion, let's say, I would say we can switch to the question answer.
Yes,
session.
thank you. I got some 4 questions from you audience. Let's just jump right into it. One is related to enterprise risk orchestration. So the question is, we have FMEA tools that work well, but each department uses something different. How can we create a consistent risk threat from suppliers to post-market without manual copy pasting?
So I guess I can take that question, because I was already mentioning that usually, I mean, in many of our engagements, we meet customer engagements that have a very heterogeneous tool landscape. And what we try to do is really to sit together to think about the processes as of now, and to identify a way to do these processes in the future. Usually, as I was emphasizing it multiple times within the platform, we have the means to bring different engineering data together, one system to align processes, and especially to emphasize the reuse of data objects in order to make sure that it is a consistent and aligned process also in the context of risk management. And this is something I think in this context that really brings a value that was already proven positive in the past in some engagements.
Thank you, Morten. Question 2, regarding PRRC, person responsible for regulatory compliance. He's responsible for liable for gaps in risk documentation. So when the auditor asks about traceability from hazards to validation, how can I ensure that nothing is missing without spending weeks collecting documents?
Okay, this is another good question. So basically, what I was showing the tables where I entered all of the information, starting with the hazard, moving over to foreseeable sequence of events or hazardous situations, severities, and to the whole risk mitigation processes. Everything is actually collected in one row. And this one row itself is actually a so-called causality relationship, meaning the data is actually being connected in the system. And this makes it quite easy because of the connectivity of the data to find out quickly what is the impact of a change, if there are some reports coming in from post-market that I might need to consider with additional risk control measures. So once again, with the connectivity of the data, it is possible to address this situation. I would not say super quickly, but definitely, that is my personal assumption, quicker than before, and definitely quicker than doing the processes document-based.
Hope this answers the question. Next one. Cross-functional governance is the topic. We have 5 different committees for risk decisions, with each with 10 plus stakeholders. The coordination takes forever. How can we streamline governance without losing control? Who wants to take over?
Yeah, I guess I can take that as well. So as I was mentioning in my demo, the word of a collaboration, or also sometimes called democratization platform, it is possible to use some data objects, for example, an issue, to collect information and to provide it to a wider audience or to a wide range of stakeholders to actually address the problem at hand. And these are the typical vehicles we use in these kinds of processes to make sure the right people are involved and also the right amount of people is involved, to make sure these processes are being taken into account with a certain priority and also a certain urgency to resolve the problem at hand. And these are the things that we usually do in our processes, in our engagement with customers in that context.
Good one. And the last question about predictive analytics. With all our data, design history, complaints, supplier metrics, we should be able to predict risks before they happen. How do we move from reactive to predictive?
Yeah, I can take the question. So to move from reactive to predictive, we can solve it with our NetVibes data science solution. So we can leverage several key capabilities that transform let's say, how you manage and utilize your data. And of course, it is for data visualization and contextualization. So NetVibes data science solution help really to visualize the data from various systems and across the organization. And this visualization, of course, makes data searchable, understandable, and actionable in the context of each user needs.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah,
We are over time. Sorry.
Yeah, but all these other predictive and real-time data insights, decision-making, and simulation, so we can really cover with our NetVibes data science.
Thank you, Claudia. Let's just wrap up. We are a little bit over time, 1-2 minutes. I want to thank you all that you took the time, really committed to this event. What I understood from Mirella is this session was recorded and will be available for you that participated here, but also later on as an on-demand webinar on our website. You will be signaled that this is available for you. If you have any specific further questions on your individual situation, just don't hesitate contacting us. We are really happy to arrange a personal conversation with you. And with that, we wish you a great success in optimizing your risk management. Have a good time. See you soon, hopefully. And thank you and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.